I first of all want to thank our chief guest, Mr. Amitabh Khan, who's been linked with a number of initiatives, important initiatives in India. And smart cities, etc., was a concept which he also thought of and worked upon even when he was the head of the Delhi-Mumbai freight corridor. So it's something which he's been involved with, and we are very lucky to have him here. Everyone knows about him, so I don't have to introduce him. Then we have our two authors. We have Mr. Adie, who's a fellow at Brookings Institution, Metropolitan Policy Program, and member of the Metropolitan Infrastructure Initiative. His work focuses on metropolitan infrastructure usage patterns, personal and freight transportation, and intersections between infrastructure and technological developments. Our fellow, who's an amazing both intellect and thinker with depth and forward-looking approach, Shamika, Ravi, who is the other author. She's a fellow here. And we are lucky to have these two knowledgeable persons who did the report. Brookings India is an Indian institution with affiliation and links to Brookings. So each of us, both there and here, value very much our independence. And we have tried to come up with two independent perspectives and seen how to make things happen. Before we go further, I request the two authors to give very quick summary, because Mr. Kant is
Sure.
somewhat pressed for time.
Sure.
So, Shamika, would you like to take over now?
Thank you. At the beginning, let me also say that this work, while it's comprehensive, it's a massive project the way it turned out. This is co-author work with Ankit Bhatia and Joseph Kane. So now the focus of the study, when we started out, and I do some work in urbanization as an economist, we've looked at various different aspects to urbanization. But when the Smart Cities project started, then the general sense we had in the beginning was it was like the elephant with the 6 blind men. Everyone touches the elephant in different forms and expects it to be very different. So the private sector view of elephant, or smart cities in this case, is very distinct from that of the government and the citizen sense of smart cities. And that is when we said, can we come up with some kind of a blueprint, some idea of what eventually should a smart city in India look like or aspire towards. So the focus was primarily governance. It started out with what are those specific governance reforms required to make Indian smart cities smart in a long, sustainable way. Then we looked at local economies as engines of growth. Cities will become smart in ways that the local economies get into this path of sustainable growth and development. So cities have to become engines of growth. You have to identify sectors which will not only create growth but also lead to creation of jobs, because jobs for India currently is one of those primary objectives. Then for each of these 3 cities, and again these 3 cities, because they are so disparate, for those of you unfamiliar, Visakhapatnam, Ajmer and Allahabad really are very, very distinct cities. So in many ways they also give us a sense of the enormity of the problem of smart cities in India, because by themselves they are very, very diverse. The solutions will be very different, but we have some basic benchmarks based. So investment gap, for each of them we evaluate what is the benchmark that is required for a city to be smart. Where are these 3 cities currently in terms of these various amenities? What is that gap and what kind of investments are required to make them smart? Then finally, and this is a great contribution from Adie, is we look at international comparisons. What we are trying to do in India, while the enormity of the scale is definitely noteworthy, the process of urbanizations and of city becoming smart is something we have seen globally happen. So Adie is going to talk about what those international comparisons are, and at the end we have very specific implications and recommendations based on the year-long study. So this, all of you know from the census, this is a complete underestimate. Not just 31% of India is urban, it's actually a very large amount. It's it's almost 40 to 45, because there is a continuity between urban and rural, and it's just the way we define that this is an underestimate. We are expected to add 200 more million people into urban space in another 15 years. And until 1992, this whole urbanization process in India was very organic. There was no systematic strategy for urbanization that we were really looking at. And then came the 74th Constitutional Amendment of 1992, which tried to set forth changes in governance that would make this long-term sustainable smartening of cities possible. Then of course the 11th five-year plan, which happened right after JNURM was introduced, was seen as an impetus into making this urbanization process again more systematic in terms of planning. Then the high-powered expert committee was set up under Isha Ahluwalia, which tried to come up with again investments required for cities to become smart. We basically, you know, when we started and I started talking to people across these 3 states, some people believed, well, this is all really rebranding. You know, we have started smart cities project really long time back. JNURM is a smart cities. So this is really rebranding or marketing, and all our data, all our analysis tells us it is not just a rebranding. In fact, there is a change in focus, and just the enormity of the scale and the promise with which it is being pushed, there is a difference. So there is also a strategic difference from what was done earlier and what is now being aspired. And also JNURM, remember, only 67 cities were picked up, and if we evaluated and found only 42% completion rate of all the projects under JNURM. So it is it's strong, it's a work in progress which had to be taken forth with much larger resource and insight. So Amrit is seen as a way of sort of extending that throughout the country. Hriday is for the heritage city development, and smart city is the most ambitious, that holds the promise of larger smart cities growth within India. So 100 cities is what we aspire with significant investment. The idea is technological upgradation, matching grants from the state government, the urban local bodies, private investments. First round there were 20 selected, and again I'll talk a little bit about it was not ad hoc. There was a reason these 20 were significantly superior in terms of the benchmarks that they have achieved and the planning, and 13 more were selected subsequently for fast track. A large part of the report talks about SPVs, because I think, and we sort of talk about this, you know, the PPP experiment we had in the last decade, while it did lead to significant infrastructure growth in the country, we also are right now grappling with this non-performing assets of public sector banks because of the way the PPP is structured. Now, vis-a-vis the smart cities, these SPVs right now have the promise of becoming PPP 2.0 in India. If we do it right, this might be the right way to proceed with public-private partnerships, specifically when it comes to urbanization and infrastructure development in urban areas. So 74th Amendment was very progressive in the way it was structured. It made regular elections mandatory. It delegated specific roles to the urban local bodies. It gave a constitutional status. The problem with this is that the implementation really remains poor still, and which has subsequently led to poor capacity at the local city administration level, because of which cities are still very much dependent on doles and grants from states and central government. This is just a figure, we love figures. You know, the orange bars are telling you the states which have actually legislated what the 74th Amendment wanted them to do. Implementation is a different story. This is just the legislation part of it. You see, the orange bars show an average of 97% of all those amendments that the 74th Amendment required, they have actually legislated it. So 97% vis-a-vis 82% for the others. So the ones that were picked up, the first 20 cities, actually have made some inroads. There is a degree of preparedness as far as smart cities are concerned. This is just to tell you how we did the investment gap. This is a benchmark, this is where they are, what is the gap, what kind of money is required. Another concept that we discuss in the report is resilience, and this is a very short, quick story. You know, Rockefeller runs a resilience program globally of 100 cities, and the only Indian city that has made it into that list is Surat from Gujarat. And it also tells you which is the city which comes closest to Surat or that particular city in terms of natural disasters or what kind of calamities and what should be the preparedness. Surat suffers from floods, actually renewed floods. So now they have a chief resilience officer. The city that comes closest to Surat is Chennai. Chennai floods was devastating last year. So sometimes the international comparisons aren't as necessary as some of our local, best practices and solutions. So perhaps we should be learning from places like Surat instead of, necessarily looking outside. So now Adie will very quickly talk about the international comparisons before we launch.
And what's so beautiful about technology, especially digital technology, is it's a great democratizing feature. It sees no national borders, it sees no colors or creeds. And so how it's implemented in cities, in theory, could be done the same everywhere. But in practice, technology works very different depending on how markets operate. So what we've been able to do with this project is use internal Brookings resources, both in terms of background statistical work, something that we published called the Global Metro Monitor, which actually many of you in the room, I push you to look at. It has 6 different Indian cities inside of it, which you can compare on economic benchmarks to other markets across the world. But also our internal know-how in terms of statistical techniques on how you could run actual analysis to figure out which cities would be relevant comparison points for these Indian markets. And what's so typical inside the smart city marketplace is to look to places like Amsterdam or Barcelona or New York. And those are exciting markets, to be sure. But in many ways, on their economic trajectory, we find them to be in different places in terms of developmental status than the Indian markets in general, and in particular, these 3 markets. What our analysis found was that, in fact, if you were to look across the world, who are the comparable cities, you see a very different list of places. And you can probably read the list from your seats, but what I want to emphasize is 2 different points. Number 1 is every single one of these cities is also in the global south. So this is not picking cities from the global north that maybe have very different investment capacities, very different technological needs than your markets. The second one is that for the most part, these are actually relatively smaller markets too. These are not mega cities. So when one is doing work in a non-mega city, of course the irony of doing this event in one of the world's truly great mega cities, that there are very different kind of investment capacities, institutional capacities as part of it. Now what we see at the same time though is clear evidence of the economic trajectories of these markets relative to the Indian marketplace and how much growth still needs to occur. So only Vizag actually has a GDP per capita that matches even one of these 9 comparison markets. At the same time, we also find that the industrial composition of the Indian marketplace also has more room for growth in terms of the developmental curve. So what I really want to emphasize are the bottom 2 darkest blue bars. Those are effectively proxies for tradable services, which are typically higher on the global value chains within industries. Those numbers are also significantly lower than the Indian counterparts. Now, at the same time, what we can also look at is the infrastructure composition. And in this case, there's also room for growth. And again, that kind of optimistic tone is done on purpose, right? This is exactly what the Smart Cities mission and this great investment opportunity is pointing towards. So in terms of piped water in the home and household toilet access, it actually is trailing other peers in the global south. But then on the flip side is that there is more of a parity around household electricity and household phone adoption. In particular, more important, especially in our global kind of technological status here, is the mobile phone, which is your darker blue bars there. Household electricity, mobile phone access are absolutely critical ingredients to building a smart city anywhere. And the way to point it out is I actually left it over there. If I could pull out my smartphone, there is no more important ingredient to spreading digital technology throughout our communities than having it. But show me a smartphone that works without a mobile phone data access, as well as the electricity to keep it continuously charged. Without that kind of ubiquitous infrastructure for all of citizens in any community, India or otherwise, it is impossible to achieve smart city status. So what can we learn from these takeaways? Number 1 is that it's very important to find the right kind of international partners to look to when learning best practices. It's also important to focus on investments that will create broad, shared prosperity, not just those that are focused at the top. And that finally, there are amazing projects underway inside those emerging market peers that you look to. We'll talk a little bit more on the panel about it, but in particular, Median in Cape Town shows some impressive examples. And one other market that was not on there, much larger than these 3 cities, Nairobi, will tell us a little bit about some of the failures you can have if you do not think about that kind of shared prosperity when building out smart city infrastructure. Thank you.